Hello, this is James Barkell.
And it is wonderful to have your company here on the centre court.
You are listening to the Coach Doctor podcast.
Strikes it beautifully and it's down the middle.
In this podcast series, we discuss all things coaching and sports science.
Beats one, beats a couple, still going.
Each episode will feature prominent coaches on the front line of their sport.
Across to Mbappe.
As well as some of the world's leading university academics who research what it takes to get the W.
All Blacks under big pressure again.
If there is an aspect of your coaching that needs some assistance, you can always count on the Coach Doctor to add life to your program.
Browning's having a terrific run. The first three to qualify. You betcha!
In this episode, I talk with Tom Carter, the current head of physical performance with the Australian Women's Rugby Sevens team. In this episode, we discuss Tom's transition from a professional rugby player into his current role in Sevens. We discuss the way Tom was perceived as a player for the New South Wales Waratahs and how that has shaped his professional career after rugby. And we also look into Tom's association with other sports such as cricket and how we as coaches can learn from other sports. Welcome, Tom Carter, to today's episode of the Coach Doctor podcast. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me. Excited to be here.
No problems at all. And just quickly, where are you at the moment?
I'm just in at Rugby Australia, so working today. So we just got back in the country from a trip overseas to America. So it's nice to be back in Australia.
Nice work, mate. Mate, I'm just going to break this interview into three parts. Firstly, I want to have a chat about your career as an elite rugby union player, then your career in other sports, and particularly cricket, because you spent a bit of time in cricket coaching-wise, and then lastly, your career as a strength and conditioning coach back in rugby union where you are now.
Yep.
So first question, after finishing up at Knox Grammar in Sydney's North, you moved to the University of Sydney to play rugby. How did you end up at uni?
Yeah, well, probably I grew up playing Gordon Juniors, but my brothers sort of went to Sydney Uni in 1995. I think the eldest one, Charles, and then Edward joined him in 1997. And so obviously university wasn't doing so well. I think they were on the verge of being relegated. And I just always followed uni. So obviously was fortunate to see uni at its worst and then obviously see it achieve a little bit more success. So brothers went there and then I went and studied psychology in 2001. So I felt like it was a natural progression or process for me to join the Colts program from there.
So you're a Gordon Junior originally and then you moved over to uni.
Yeah, I don't think they've forgiven me till this day, but yeah.
I think there's been a few of those situations, and
yeah.
The old Gordon's a bit cranky at uni sometimes.
Yeah.
Never mind. Mate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're the second most capped player at uni behind Rupert Rosenblum now with 215 games. And what does the club mean to you now as a person that spent so much time there and applied your trade there for so many years?
Yeah, look, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity. I think you can remember your first grade debut and then obviously to play so many games for such a great place and have such history and the people I met, friendships I formed, the bonds you make. Yeah, it's an incredible place and one I think forever etched. I think if you spend 17 years at a place, often voluntarily, you probably, it has a strong affinity or connection to you. So yeah, forever grateful and I made some amazing memories and learned an awful amount as well. So, it's a pretty special place.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you, how many grand finals did you play in and how many did you win with uni? Can you remember exactly? Or
Yeah, no. I think I ended up playing in nine grand finals out of the 10 in the year and we won 7. So we lost in 2011 to Eastwood and we lost to North in 2016, but had a little bit of success in between. So I played a Colts grand final in 2002 and a second grade grand final as well in 2003 and 4, but we lost the fourth 2004 one. So yeah, they all sort of are special in their own right, I suppose. You certainly remember the losses more than the wins, probably, just around things you'd probably do differently. But I feel very grateful. I had some great teammates, I guess, that were able to carry me for a lot of the time. So really, really fortunate to make those memories.
Yeah, nice. I'm sure you provided some impact in that team as well, mate, not just the teammates. So, mate, why were uni so good? What do you believe that they did really well that other clubs might not have done?
I think sort of they've got this really good systems and processes around sort of, I guess, how do you narrow the gap between professional and amateur football? So through, I think, the sports union in the early years, and the people like Andrew Winterbaum and David Mortimer and Greg Harris were able to formulate a program that allowed footballers to develop physically. So they'd identify young cult players, and I think a lot of teams recruit really good players now, but they're able to put really good systems and processes in and around them, around strength and conditioning, skill acquisition, and then a group of players that had played for a long period of time together developed a cohesion and, I guess, a bond and a culture and an ideology of how to play, and that probably allowed them to have sustained success. There's a lot of debate saying that we had Super Rugby players come back in, but there's also the debate that a lot of them were developed and grown from within Sydney Uni. So we just trained harder. And I'd like to think we weren't always ahead of the game. I think other clubs had some really good trends and ideas, and certainly, Souths and Manly and Eastwood certainly set the bar, and then Norths and then Warringah just set the bar at the start of the season. But we were able to slowly claw them back at times. But yeah, it definitely came down to the physical development and skill development around what we were able to do in players' development stages.
And who were some of your coaches at uni that made you a better footballer, or made you the footballer that ended up playing Super Rugby?
Yeah, I sort of had Steve Surridge, who was a former New Zealand All Black number 8 and Crusader. He had a massive influence on me around physical development and just, I guess, probably believing in ourselves. Billy Millard, who's now the director of football at Harlequins, he was a fantastic coach, someone who certainly challenged us in different ways. He coached me at the Australian Sevens team. We had Damien Hill, we had Todd Loudon, and then we also had sort of Chris Malone, who was probably 2013 when we had a really, really strong side and ended up having a fantastic result with Eastwood. He was a great coach. And then even my lady is Garrett Cowley and Tim Davidson, left an enormous amount of, I guess, knowledge and resources for me, particularly how I coach now around how you manage people, but how you set up things and getting people to believe. And I think we can get so caught up in structures and the technical stuff or tactical stuff of rugby, but there's certainly more to it than that. And so, yeah, I think they all sort of shaped me in different ways. Even the coaches you probably didn't think would influence you ended up influencing you a lot. Trevor Woodman, who was the England World Cup winning prop in 2003, he had a massive influence on my idea around sort of how front rowers and forwards should train. And, that was pretty good. And then obviously just probably Marty Harland was the forefather of strength and conditioning for a long period of time there. And then Tim Lay, and they obviously, they shaped me enough for me to want to go into the industry. And they certainly had a fantastic influence on my career.
I guess you got your crack at Super Rugby when I believe it was at its peak. Again, you are one club player, so you were very, very, I guess, embedded in Sydney Uni. And then I guess you took that same attitude to the Waratahs. You played in the 2008 final, loss to the Crusaders over in Christchurch. And also one of, I guess, my memorable moments of you playing was the cracking game at the SFS when you scored twice against the British and Irish Lions back in 2013. What were some of your fondest memories of playing with the Waratahs?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously another incredible experience. Just playing with legends of the game, Phil Ward, Dan Bickerman, Lottie Takiri, and also then lifelong friends like Daniel Halangahu, Dean Munn, Will Corbell, Luke Burgess. They were people that we had an incredible era there of success, I felt, even though we didn't win the title, but we played in a few finals and a few semis, and a pretty remarkable group, really. So nothing would ever beat, I suppose, running out to a packed football stadium on a Friday night. And we used to get 35, 40,000 people, and it was just an electric atmosphere. And you just felt like you were representing your state, your family, and people that you didn't ever want to let down. So, yeah, they talk about the highs of professional sport and the lows afterwards, but you certainly miss those moments because, and we had a lot of times where we were struggling or form or we'd lose games, but there was always this remarkable belief amongst the group that when it mattered most, we could influence and have a performance that would enable us to have success in that season. And that's a pretty special belief. We were a pretty I guess, resilient and robust group around that stuff. And when it mattered most, we sort of backed ourselves to deliver.
Why do you think now that the like Super Rugby, like as you said, back then you'd run out to a stadium of 30,000, 40,000 supporters and fans, whereas now it's really, I guess, crowd numbers are dwindling. The interest seems to be dwindling a bit, and I guess COVID hasn't helped with that. And that changing, I guess, structure of Super Rugby's meant that it's been a little bit harder to follow. What do you think the main reason for some of that?
Yeah, probably two. One is the competition structure. I think, we would historically play in New Zealand, South Africa and Australia round robin, and you'd travel around the world and it would be home and away, and then obviously, round robin, and then you'd play, final series. So I think probably too much football, particularly local derbies. Now I understand that there's importance of that from a revenue perspective, and that's certainly above my pay grade. But I think that one was probably the competition structure. I think people really had an affinity to it in the past, and playing South African or seeing South African teams travel out here, and you could see some of the superstars like Brian Habana play, etc. I think attracted people, but ultimately is winning. I'm on the other side of a disappointing Olympic campaign, and now we're winning again. And I think winning breeds lots of things, and it breeds interest and it breeds a connection, and everyone wants to back your team that's winning. And I think Darren Coleman's done a really good job of turning it around. Whilst they haven't won anything yet, they're starting to win, and there's a little bit more of excitement about the Waratahs. So I think that was the big thing is winning and having a connection to your community. So having a home ground, like they obviously haven't had one for a while, but having a home ground and people seeing people play junior football and then playing for their Shoot Shield team and then playing for the Waratahs gives people a sense of meaning and belonging. And I think it will come good again. I think if they keep winning, people will come back and watch them, and that's exciting and great for the game. I mean, ultimately, whether you're playing subbies rugby or you're an ex-player or you're working in professional rugby, we all want and want to see rugby do really well, and we're all probably deep down love rugby or great rugby people. So I think that's probably the key. If they can continue to have success, then people will come back.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that's the case. Mate, you were coached by Ewan McKenzie for a large portion of your career at the Waratahs. Ewan's obviously had a lot of success as a coach, taking the Waratahs to a few finals and a few final series. Also leading the Reds to a championship back in 2011 from memory. What made Ewan a great coach?
He was an incredible visionary and planner. Like, I felt like he understood where we needed to go and was able to sell that vision, and then was able to give you a clear role and responsibility within that. I think that for me was the biggest thing. It was pretty clear where you stood with him and what was required in order to get consistency in your performance. So he was a fantastic coach, and I thought did an incredible job, particularly in difficult times at the Waratahs. But he was always able to bring a group together to get them to play for each other, and I think that was probably the testament to him as a coach and a person. Okay.
Now, when you were playing back in those days at the Waratahs, you often people often spoke about the player that everyone loved to hate, sort of thing, especially from, not from the Waratahs fans, but from other teams and other clubs. Was there more to Tom Carter, the rugby player, than the persona we saw and heard out in the media and saw on the pitch?
Well, obviously, probably not, because you sort of can't really talk your way out of things you behave your way into. But I guess I get asked that question a lot now. And do I regret it? Well, probably, because now you're trying to form a career that's going to last a lot longer than when you played. But other people say I had a lot of success at club rugby level. I think with the Super Rugby stuff, I've said it to someone the other day. I wish I play with more freedom. I felt really comfortable at Shoot Shield level just playing footy, and I often felt like I was perhaps playing for my spot the whole time, and maybe I should have offloaded the ball more, or I reflect a lot to Daniel Hohengahu, who's over at the Auckland Blues as an assistant coach, and I just feel like I was not good enough to play for the Wallabies, so I did a lot of pre-season. So I did 10, which is quite a few, and I think you go into that pre-season not thinking, how do I become a better footballer? You get obsessed and focused on getting picked, and that's probably the biggest regret. I wish I went in with a more open mindset around how do I add value to my game and then transfer that into the field. So that's probably influenced my coaching a fair bit around that. I think ultimately improvement and success is not linear. So it takes people time and takes different rates of improvement. But we sometimes just throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's probably been, probably the biggest thing that I look back on. Is one, how I played, and two, how I behaved. I can't change that, but it certainly shaped how I'll go forward with my own ideas and thoughts.
But you definitely brought that really competitive edge to you. I think a lot of people love to see that passion and love to see that, I guess, competitive nature in you when you played.
Yeah,
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, I definitely had white line fever.
Yeah.
And probably very different to who I am off the field, like, Jekyll and Hyde or whatever you want to, analogy you want to use. I spend a lot of time probably with people discussing and explaining that, and then after a while they get to know me. They're like, "My God, you're so different to what the perception or reality, is." So, it's. I think one day, hopefully, I'll look back and reflect fondly on my career. But ultimately, I think my teammates would say that I was the one guy they probably wanted in the trenches with me. Like, I demanded and asked a lot of them, but ultimately, I felt like I probably delivered to the capacity or capability that I had. Sure, there'd be things I'd do differently, and things I can't take back. But yeah,
Nice. Well, you certainly had a very good career, Super Rugby wise, and obviously you had a lot of success at the Waratahs. And I guess that leads to that next question. You finished up just before the Waratahs maiden championship in 2014. Was it hard to, was it sort of bittersweet seeing the boys win that championship that year and not being out in the field and being with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was out there. There was sort of a presentation that they gave to a few of us before the final, and then out at ANZ, and then when they won, it was just such a mixed emotion. And just to see people like Nathan Gray, who'd given so much of their life, and Sharon Flaherty, the doctor, crying, it was really hard. And my first thought was for people like Phil Waugh and Chris Whittaker and Matt Burke, legends of the game, who really shaped the Waratahs culture and era. And you're sort of really happy for them, but obviously Phil just missed out. He was 2 or 3 years earlier than me then when he retired, but their opportunity to win. So incredibly, happy for them, and just to know the volunteers and the people like that had given so much, and to see so many people there. And it was a pretty special night. But that's the way life goes, isn't it? Sometimes you don't get to the rewards or success you hope, but I'm really, really, really happy, I suppose, and grateful to be a part of the Waratahs in that era, but I didn't get the final ultimate reward.
You've just rattled off a couple of big names, and I guess who was one of the players, or who was one player that you thought that you played with, whether it be Matt Burke or whether it be Lottie Dakiri or Wendell Saylor or whoever, Phil Waugh, that you think, wow, it was an awesome experience playing alongside that player because of not just their ability on the field, but everything else that they brought.
Yeah, Phil Waugh comes to mind, Dan Vickerman, Cliffy Palu, like that were, and I think Adam Fryer, and they were in that forward pack that was just so physically uncompromising. And they would, even though we lost the final in 2008, to a Crusader side that had sort of, Brad Thorne and these type of players, those guys were able to go toe to toe with some of the best forward packs in the world and do it consistently. And what they put their bodies through on a weekend, and then do it consistently with travel and physically. And that was probably something that was pretty inspirational. Like, you as a back, when they were leading from the front like that, you certainly wanted to follow them. To Tafu Polisher now obviously was in that group, Dean Martin, Will Corbell, and people that really, I guess, sacrificed their bodies for the benefit of the team's success was pretty inspiring.
So after you retired in 2013 from Super Rugby, if I'm correct in saying that, and then you played on at Sydney Uni for a couple more years and got one or two more championships or Shoot Shield victories with Sydney Uni, you then retired from rugby completely and you went into a completely different sport. And I recall seeing you down at Sydney Uni working with cricketers, and I'm thinking, what does this bloke know about cricket? How did you end up working with cricketers?
Yeah, so I was involved, ironically, I was involved in cricket sort of S&C sort of through the back end of my career, sort of 2011, 12. But then in 2013 and 14, Gary Whittaker asked me to be chairman of selectors for Sydney Uni Cricket Club. So I was just a I guess, an impartial or view, and we ended up winning the club championship and 2 first-grade premierships. So that was probably my first foray into cricket, and then it coincided with Brad Haddon's daughter falling ill, and I'd known Brad a long time in my life, and he was under pressure to sort of try and get back into the Australian team with Mia suffering neuroblastoma. So he asked me to train him, and sort of one of the conditions was that I just had to be flexible in terms of my hours because he didn't know in and out of hospital what he'd be able to do. And so I started training Brad, and we were able to get him back to the Australian side, and then back to, obviously they won a World Cup, and he had that Ashes performance probably outside of Mitchell Johnson. He was probably the most influential player for Australia. And then he sort of introduced me to Nathan Lyon. So I started training Nathan in 2014, which has now been a friendship or relationship of 9 years. So every time Nathan will come home, we'll spend blocks and of weeks and sometimes months training together. And then that led me into Sean Abbott, who obviously has had a pretty incredible journey himself. So from there, those guys recommended me. I went into the Sydney Sixers, so did 5 years with the BBL, and I said it to them all the time. I'm not going to talk to them about how to play cricket stroke or how to be better, but I can help them move better and help them execute their cricket skills. And that was probably the biggest thing for me in my industry is that we're not doctors, we're not performing miracles as a role as heads of performance or strength and conditioning. Our job is to support the athlete to be better at their athletic movements or their skills, and that's probably the philosophy I've tried to approach my whole career. Is I was very limited and focused too much on S&C, but ultimately to get better at something you need to be able to practice your skills. So that's sort of, I guess, how I transferred it into cricket, which was hard, no different to the stigma attached to me as a player when I played shoot shield or my persona on the football field. It was hard because you're walking in as a rugby player into a cricket environment. Everyone's going to think, well, what's this guy going to get us to do? Is lift super heavy weights or whatever. So I was probably really well prepared for that. But then when they saw transference and they felt that they were getting better, that's probably when you started to win them over, and they'd had a moment where they executed their skills under pressure. They were like, okay, this really makes a difference. Very, very probably controversial and contrary to what current trends are, and people probably find that polarizing and probably certainly don't find that themselves that comfortable in and around that stuff. But it's probably what I've learned and the insight I had as a player and now as a coach.
And had you ever played cricket yourself, or is it completely new to you?
No, I played cricket at school, and
yeah.
I think everyone dreamt of wearing the baggy green, and everyone played backyard cricket. But probably my father would say I was a better cricketer than a rugby player.
Okay.
But no, just as you sort of transition out from school to footy from school to you sort of tend to do one sport, whereas at school you probably could do multiple. So that was sort of my background, and I guess I've always loved the game, and I really enjoyed working it. And then, ironically, last year I went to Sydney Cricket Club, and they hadn't won a premiership in 30 years, and worked with Harry and Ben Manenti, and we ended up winning a premiership there. So I was sort of pretty proud of my cricketing success and the people I've been able to work with along the way. It's a good sport to be involved with. So
the moral of the story is, if you want to win a cricket premiership, get you involved.
No. It's funny. I've been doing some work with some Kent cricket. So Kent cricketer, so Zach Crawley, the England opener, came out here about 2 or 3 years ago, and Daniel Bell Drummond. So I've been working with a few of those guys, and they still haven't been able to win, and they're pretty quick to remind me of that. So I don't think my success is undoubted, that's for sure.
No, all good. So you went on and did about 4 years in the Big Bash with the Sydney Sixers. You've sort of talked a little bit about that transition from rugby to cricket, but how was it going from that really physical game of rugby, where there is a big focus on, I guess, hypertrophy and getting bigger and being prepared for collisions, to a game like cricket that requires, I guess, patience, a lot of strategy, and probably a very different skill set from rugby?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, you try and, I guess, it was such a fashionable term, marginal gains, I think, in Team Sky and the Tour de France for a long period of time. But really all you're doing is trying to help them incrementally. Like, they come out of playing 5 usually, historically, before BBL got extended, a little bit like Super Rugby, the competition structure changed. But they'd come out of playing shield games and a lot of like 50 over cricket. And then it was the BBL was almost like a break or a short window over sort of December and January. But it obviously had a change in intensity. 20 overs, you've got to bowl them in 80 minutes or 90 minutes. So more accelerations, higher intensity movements in the field. So there was sort of like a bit of a reloading or re-education around what were the demands are. But ultimately, it was just trying to be a stimulus change for this group of people that were coming together. We had people like Jordan Silk or Jackson Bird from Tasmania. Would often have international players come in, which were really cool, like Jason Roy, the English opener, and Sam Billings, for example. So the biggest thing was trying not to be an agent of change, but sort of fit seamlessly into it and make their S&C a little bit different and more enjoyable as opposed to what they've been doing in a mundane mainstream program. Some of them have been in their state programs for 7 or 8 years, and I can relate to the mundaneness or sometimes monotony of that, and that's not disrespectful of those programs. It's just more of a consequence of time. So yeah, just try to provide a little bit of different energy, build some good relationships with the players, and make it as enjoyable as possible, and sort of drip feed in S&C stuff without them really knowing it. So therefore, when they return to their teams after BBL into Shield, that they were ready to go and perform. So that sort of was my philosophy or underpinning philosophy.
Yeah, nice one. And what did you learn from cricket that you could later use in rugby?
I was blown away by their skill acquisition. I can't believe how hard they worked at skill. It probably made me feel pretty embarrassed about myself as a professional footy player. You might throw 10 extra passes at the end of a session, but to see that the amount of batting a batter would go through with drills and coaching and then refining that I guess session and reviewing it was probably the biggest change in my mind around how we coach skill acquisition in rugby. And again, we go through all there's these theorists around tactical periodization and how do we coach and session structures and time on feet and all these things that come around in my space. But ultimately, the biggest thing I learned from cricket was the best players tend to spend the most time practicing. And they do it religiously, and they often do it with the right skill, and they definitely do it with the right technical and tactical context to it. But their level of skill acquisition left certainly me for dead, and there's no wonder why. I was probably could have been a better passer or kicker, for example. So, that was the big thing.
And on the flip side, what do you think you brought from rugby that helped cricket performance?
Training intensity, like just intensity, like their sessions can drag out a lot, and getting coaches to understand that if you can, 50 minutes of a really high intensity session might give them the same amount as bowling for 4 hours or sessions for 4 hours, and then just challenging that you don't have to do the same thing over and over again just because it's been done. But obviously, cricket's a very historical game, steeped in tradition, but trying to I guess challenge some of those norms that have existed and their methodologies around that. And it's still a challenge and certainly set in their ways. But I think that the modern coaches that can really create an environment that promotes learning and challenges intensity, I think we'll get a really, really good significant change in cricket. And that's, I think, the way the future of the game's going.
Now, before we move back to your current role with Sevens Rugby, if there was any other sports you could work with, what would be a sport that you'd love to sort of get involved with and work with? And it could be anything in the world.
Oh, geez, that's a good question. I'd like to, I think like the next challenge is to, I've been around teams that have been very successful. Obviously the Sevens team hasn't won yet, but I think trying to take a team that hadn't been successful and change that around, like that would be really, really, really cool. So I've sort of followed what France have done in the Six Nations with Fabien Gauthier and just look at how they've been able to develop a system over there through their clubs, and then that's transferred. Those type of things are pretty cool. But probably no sport. Maybe football would be one that would interest me. I think, how do you create, obviously they play an enormous amount of football, but how do you integrate more athletic qualities into the training paradigm, which isn't just purely S&C focused, it's related to tactical, technical. That would be something that would, interest me significantly.
Yeah, there'd probably be a good correlation between your cricket skill acquisition stuff and your football skill acquisition stuff. I think they're in a similar sort of vein with the amount of technical work that they do.
Yeah, and I think getting that balance between, small, medium, large-sided games. Like you think about that in cricket, it's like close skills of catching versus then how do you create fielding drills that create running intensity, but also give them the opportunity to improve the skill. And that's the big debate, isn't it? All the time around, is it physical or is it skill, and how do we integrate and merge them? So, that's the real challenge. I think getting outside I mean, I'm not sure if I'm up for the challenge tomorrow, but I think certainly one day again, if your family life and all of those things would need to be in order. But I think to immerse yourself in a program that was struggling and trying to really change it and challenge yourself to get that type of change would be, what I suppose would be the career. Ideal goal.
Yeah, maybe take the Socceroos to a World Cup, mate, and win that.
Yeah, well, like I think that's the part, isn't it? Is getting outside your comfort zone, but then I guess taking the time and having the time to build relationships with people and time to change those I guess systems and processes.
Yeah, great. So, mate, in 2019, you began your role with Rugby Australia as the strength and conditioning coach of the Australian Women's Sevens program. How did you find your way into this role?
Funnily enough, it was Johnny Manenti rang me up. I'd known Johnny a long period of time. We played together, but also just his brother-in-law coached me. I'd worked with his sons. He approached me and said, "Would I be interested in getting involved in women's sevens?" and sat down with me and had a chat. We discussed the vision and discussed obviously that they were reigning Olympic champions. And I took that opportunity. I didn't think I'd work that. I left Sydney University in 2017. And I didn't think I'd work in rugby again. Obviously, I'd been in it for 17 years, plus my school years, but 17 years in senior football as either a player or as a coach. So I sort of wasn't sure that I wanted to do it again, but here I am back in it. And I've been really, really grateful for John and Scott Barham for giving me the opportunity and to be able to work here.
From your perspective, and also from, I guess, what the research says, do you think that sevens is the most physically demanding sport due to the aerobic demands, the contact demands, and the repeated anaerobic efforts?
Yeah, it is. And look, they've changed the structure around tournaments, whether it's a 3-day tournament with 2 days or 2 games a day, or is it a 2-day tournament with 3 games a day? It's incredibly challenging on the body. It is the most brutal sport in terms of very high speed running, acceleration, deceleration, collisions. And then you've got to, warm up, cool down, and then you've got to do it multiple times a day, and then your preparation. So it's a pretty awesome sport to be involved in from that regard, around challenging the norms of capacity and what is capable. I think that's probably the most thing I look forward to is trying to consistently keep Australia or get Australia back ahead of the game and not be chasing, but sort of setting trends. So we haven't, up until recently, been able to do that, but we've obviously had a little bit of success lately, which is really pleasing to see, I suppose, what this group's capable of and perhaps where we can take them.
If you had to choose one aspect of the role that you enjoyed the most, would it be developing, I guess, that anaerobic conditioning or the aerobic conditioning, or would it be the strength stuff that you're doing in the gym?
No, probably strength and power stuff. I think there's probably a perception. Our group came from a touch football background, and the perception is they're in a fantastic running group, which they are, but their strength and power is quite incredible. Like if you see them lift in the gym and see them jump and apply that stuff, it's pretty incredible to see. And that's something that when you transfer it into the game, we're not the biggest nation by far. We often are smaller than most of our opposition, but seeing our girls being able to technically and tactically, I guess physically, compete and beat opposition is something that's really pleasing for me.
So what's it like working with some of Australia's greatest athletes, girls like Charlotte Caslick and Shani Williams? Tell me a little bit about a day in the life of working as a strength and conditioning coach with these sort of athletes and these girls.
Yeah, well, I think you can have as I said a little bit earlier, you probably can have your preconceived ideas about them, but Charlotte's probably the best athlete I've ever worked with. Physically, it's just unbelievable. Both aerobic, running capacity, and then strength, power, and speed, and then just the way she sees the game. So pretty lucky to have someone like her to work with. And then obviously Shani at 34 is, I think she ran a lifetime best yo-yo the other day, and her performances in the tournaments have been just unbelievable. So just the mindset or their ability to really, really embrace that hard work, and then thrive in it, and do it year upon year is pretty incredible. So I'm very lucky. Like, the group's very gifted, and there's some young talented kids as well, which are starting to learn to believe in themselves, and they're seeing themselves develop physically, and it's transferring to games, and that's always really exciting too, is to see the younger Faith Nathans and players like that who have come into the system and have been here for now 3 years and are finally starting to dominate World Series games and really, I guess, show the world how good they can be, and that's pretty exciting to be around.
So obviously the Tokyo Olympics didn't bring the result the team had hoped for. What have you changed since then that's led to so much success post the Olympic Games?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've probably just been more clear around what I think they need to do in the demands of the game, and that's probably up for debate from an outside perspective around what we should and shouldn't do. But ultimately, I believe that for us to be the best in the world, we've got to be the best team on our feet, consistently on back in the game, back in our feet, and being able to move and then run. And that's probably, we've done a fair bit of running, the girls will attest to, but that's probably what our DNA is, an ideology of a group. And we've set some very internal goals around, we want to be the best running team that's played the game, and we want to be really clear around that when people see us play, that they see that stuff. And then, just like no talent required stuff. When people watch us play, we play with a high energy and I guess reflect some of those behaviours. That's probably been the biggest thing. Not that we didn't do that in Tokyo, but we probably didn't just do it consistently enough. And just, I think sevens, as we touched upon, is such a hard sport that if you're not really clear around that and you're not preparing for that both physically and mentally consistently, it's easy probably to take a shortcut or not have consistency in those type of things. So that's probably been the biggest thing.
Another question I had, and I heard you speak about this, I think it was just before COVID hit, 2020, talking about building resilience and grit, but also being able to keep athletes fresh and responsive. And I think the talk you gave was, are we becoming too precious with our elite athletes, or do we push them a certain level? So what's the formula for success? Do we push them to, just before breaking point, or to develop that resilience and that grit and that determination in the heat of the battle? Or do we have to just, follow the sports science?
Yeah, I think that's the art of it, isn't all the science of it, I suppose, or the delicate balance. Like, you want to push them to the edge, but you don't want to push them over. And I think too many practitioners either don't push them too hard enough, so they're not on the edge, or they push them over the edge, and then you get a massive amount of injuries. And I think out of COVID, the one thing that I've probably learned is that footballers or players or athletes need to be able to play football. And that's probably the key ingredient, is because they miss those years, you don't get those years back. Hopefully you get them at the end of your career, like players can play longer, but the ability to play football and make decisions is the most important thing. So I guess developing a model which gives them resilience and robustness from a physical perspective, and then allows the coaches to coach them. And that's probably been my philosophy, is build some capability or physical qualities, or we talk about physical numeracy or the alphabet, and then allow the coach to coach them. And then the balance is using some key metrics that you build up over years through experience with a group, and then I guess there's probably 4 or 5 for me that are really, really key, and I hang my hat on them, and then trying to shape the group. And even if they're in rehab or injured, is building them back into that capacity to give them that opportunity to hit those metrics. That's probably and it's a question. It's a really good question. It's what we ask ourselves all the time: like, what's too much and what's not enough, and what's the right amount. And there's so much emerging technology, GPS data, wellness questionnaires, all those type of things. And then it's probably knowing your athlete, knowing what day you can push, and having great relationships with staff, your coach, your physios, of when it is to and always seeking their counsel around that. Is it the day we push or not to push? But the human body's really quite incredible. If you can give them a level of resilience and capacity, they tend to tolerate, particularly our group at the moment, they tend to tolerate what we've been able to try and push them towards. So now it's working. So it's working in the sense that we're winning. But that might not be the right way either. And I'm pretty measured enough to think that there could be think or something else we could do better or more. But for right now, given where the group's at with their age, what they've been through, COVID was really challenging. The disappointment of the Olympics was really challenging. I think right now that's probably enough.
As a strength and conditioning coach, do you play any role in the athlete's nutrition, or have you got a dietitian or somebody else?
We've got nutrition consultants, but I'm pretty clear around. I think our job is to help educate them and help support them for a lifelong. But we also want them. We're not like the Wallabies that come in for a short test period. We're pretty much a family. We're here, 52 weeks of the year. So helping girls come in at various ages or stages of their life and helping to educate them and develop them, I think, is an important part of it. So work with a nutrition consultant around, giving recommendation and support towards that, but ultimately trying to empower them to make better decisions. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is if they're healthy and happy, they're going to be able to perform their job, but it's also going to be sustainable. That's probably the big focus from my end.
Yeah. Okay.
And mindful that a lot of our group, I think 9 are under 21, that they've got to live life as well. That's part of growing up and enjoying it. You want them to look forward to coming to work. That's probably a big thing for me is we all know the pressure of this team and where it sits in the rugby landscape and how important it is, but be creating an environment that allows them to have fun and flourish along the way is important.
So one of your girls at the moment, I've seen a few pictures on Instagram, I think through you or Aussie Sevens or someone, is Jakai Whitfield, and she's recently made a comeback from an ACL injury. And I've seen a lot of footage, obviously, of you working with her, especially around that strength area. Is there a different approach you take with younger athletes coming through or coming back from injury than what you might do with the older girls like Shani and Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's interesting that there's a lot of commentary out there at the moment around ACLs, particularly in AFLW and female athletes. It was heartbreaking for Jakai because she was certainly on track and progressing really, really well at the back end of 2020 when she did her ACL. So we consulted John McGrath, who's at Pitch Ready, who did a great job. Tim McGrath did a great job in and around helping us, program and plan for Jakai's return, but ultimately the consequence of it is just time. Like, it takes time. They say you can come back within 6 to 9 months of an ACL to return to play. Probably that return to perform takes a little bit longer, just to improve that lower body power and I guess confidence and competence to be able to do it. But Jakai was really, really good in our last trip to USA, and we feel like she's finally coming out the other end of it. But absolutely, the approach to young athletes versus old is totally different. You've got to, I talk about genotype or phenotype. So what are their genetics, and then what's their environment? And you probably really need to skew it towards them. And so certain players like Charlotte respond differently to a player like Shani. And then it's probably, as I just touched upon earlier, working out what those numbers are that we need to build them up towards and get them to, and then allow them to reintegrate. I'm adamant, having been around football for long enough, no one ever got better being in rehab. So our job is to get them back out of rehab in really good physical shape. They can get physically better in rehab, but you don't get better at playing footy in rehab. So our job is to get them out of rehab as fast as possible, in the best possible shape, and then get them back playing football. And that's probably how we try to approach it within each individual's strengths and I guess not limitations, but needs.
And again, I've got another left field question. Franz Bosch style training, do you do any of that sort of stuff where, because it's such a high speed collision based sport and players are going to be, contacted from all different angles, do you do a lot of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, the motor learning and control stuff, we've been fortunate that John Pryor has been in and around the program about that motor development and transference. And I'm probably not as well versed in it as others. So we certainly try and apply some of the principles to it. It's not my strong suit. So I'm probably more around trying to get transference on the footy field. How do we transfer S&C stuff to footy? And that to me is, I know everyone will laugh at me and go, that's pretty simple, but it is. Like, there's so many fads and trends, and I probably sit pretty neutral. Like, if I could apply his principles more effectively because I understood them, I'd love to, but that's probably not my strength. So I try and, as I touched upon, give the football coaches enough opportunity to make them better at footy, and then make those movements relevant, and then consistently touch upon them. And that's probably, I think, the key. If you look at his principles, those that employ them, they get really, really good gains out of them. But it's a very complex theory to understand as well. And then ultimately, we're on time constraints. There's only X amount of S&C time that we can get really in the week, because obviously it's one facet of the game of sevens. There's the technical, tactical, physical, and then there's the cultural, psychological. So how much of that pie am I willing to invest in if I'm not as confident or perhaps proficient in it?
Yeah. How much time per week would you have for, I guess, S&C, and I guess if you break that down, your strength stuff, your conditioning stuff?
Yeah, they do somewhere between 4 to 6 strength sessions a week, depending upon who they are. And then there's anywhere between 4 to 6 field sessions a week. And obviously you get a warm up at the start where you can add some athletic qualities in. And then there's some elements, if it's a running block or there's a limitation, they might do more running at the end of the session. But ultimately it's more around getting them to play footy. Like that's, I think, and again, there's not much scientific validity to this statement, but I suspect, looking at the amount of injuries in both NRL and other sports at the moment around teams that have returned from COVID, is that the training intensity in the environment maybe is not as appropriate as it should be to prepare them for the demands of the game. So that's, for me, the big thing, is getting enough intensity in the training to allow them to play and get through games. And then you get in a really good cycle. And I think it's really hard for people when you're caught in that cycle where you're getting a lot of injuries because you can't train at the right intensity because you don't have the players. And therefore, then all of a sudden you're in this vicious cycle where your training intensity or stimulus isn't right. And then you're going into games. Or conversely, you then try and ramp up the training intensity without the appropriate foundations, and then you get more injuries in training. So it's really, really, really hard balance to manage. But looking at the great teams, what they're doing is them, and people are coming in and out of COVID having it. So you've got to be measured around that too. What opportunities do you give them to give them a rest to refreshen them, and then give them a stimulus. So I'm not for one sitting here saying I've got all the answers or have an answer, but sort of my insight or thoughts would be is that that's the conundrum a lot of teams are faced with at the moment, the sporting teams throughout the world. I see it in cricket. Cricketers are coming back and getting side strains because they're having to ramp up bowling loads, but they might have been stuck in isolation or quarantine bubbles, so they wouldn't have been able to get that exposure. And that's probably the best example to my knowledge.
All right, Tom, last question, mate, and I really appreciate your time so far. A lot of the coaches I've interviewed have done or are doing further education to, I guess, improve themselves as a coach and improve their knowledge around their area of coaching. And I noticed you've recently done your Masters of Sports Coaching at Sydney Uni, and you're currently in the process of doing a PhD. What does continued education mean to you, and why is it important for coaches to continue?
Oh, I think it's the most important thing. I think that growth mindset, I sort of don't want to come across in this podcast thinking I know all the answers, or, I guess I've got a couple of insights as a player, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some really incredible athletes. But I think you've always got to seek to be better and review and reflect. And I think that's probably the thing. The professor, Franco Imbrazelli, I think from UTS has challenged us. So, you do a systematic review and you start looking at the demands of the sport and the science around it. And it really just challenges your inquisitive or I guess your mind around what is right and what is wrong. And particularly in strength and conditioning, there's so many trends and there's internet and there's just so many, I guess, different ideologies and philosophies, which might be right for certain people or certain individuals or certain teams. But I think the continued education's really challenged me to think, when you first leave sport, you think you know a lot. And then probably 5 years later, you're like, God, I don't know as much as I thought. And now, having gone down that road, it's like, my God, I really know very little. But I'm open to that. And I'm hopefully always seeking to be better around that stuff. And then that ties back to your own ideology around, okay, am I planned? Am I on track? Have I still, I guess, implementing the philosophies and ideologies or behaviours that I want in my group? And then you're always reflecting and reviewing that. And that's probably the best thing about education. I've met people like yourself, and I think Don O'Connor and there was Daryl Gibson was there, and Alex Apakis and Heather Garriock, all these great people that have these ideas. And I think what you learn is the coaches. There's so many great coaches with great ideas out there, but it's often the implementation or one or two things that might stop them from having great success. And that's probably what the continuing education's done for me, is just, I love it so much. I wish I could do it more. It's just time to read and reflect and ask yourself, could I apply it to my group? If not, why not? Or if I could, how do I do it? Where does it fit in with the rest of it? And that's a really good process as a coach, I think, because if you look back on your year, you can often get sidetracked or lost, particularly when you're winning and losing around, did I start the year and did I start and finish the year with the same philosophy or same values and beliefs? And if not, why not? Well, where did it go wrong? Or what got me distracted from probably the most important things? And yeah, that's what I love, the continuing education. It's a real good reference for me to see if I'm on track or ways for me to improve.
I really like that idea, or that ideology of, if something that you've researched or something you're studying, will it work for you? And if not, why not? That's nice, mate. I like that. And just finally, how far along are you with your PhD? How long till we call you Dr. Carter?
Oh, no, a couple of years away. Obviously, we're preparing for the Commonwealth Games, and then we've obviously got hopefully Paris 2024. So I'd like to think hopefully around Paris 2024 would allow me to finish it up. The systematic reviews, just looking at the game of sevens, and I feel really passionate about it because I want to tell the story around female sevens. I'm really passionate about female sport, and I'd like to continue to work in it. I don't know if I'd necessarily go back to other male sports. Not saying I wouldn't, but I really enjoy working with female athletes, and I want to be able to tell their story, and particularly this group. They've had an incredible amount of success historically, and they're starting to have some more now. But I think it's a really under-researched area, and I think their story is deserving to be told. So hopefully we can uncover some ideas around particularly training. I think I touched upon it earlier around that ACL stuff in female athletes. I know a lot of young girls are suffering those type of injuries, and it'd be good to be able to help shape or help guide emerging and developing female athletes to be a little bit more resilient and robust around that stuff.
Awesome. No, that sounds awesome, mate, to help out women's sport like that. So fantastic. Well, Tom Carter, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate you giving up this, an hour of your time. And I know you've got a busy schedule there, and you've only just got back from the US. So thanks so much for your help, and all the best going forward for the season for you and the girls. Hopefully you win that World Series this year.
Thanks very much, James. Really appreciate it.
No worries, mate.
Thank you.
Despite the persona we saw in Super Rugby, Tom is an incredibly humble and relatively quiet-spoken guy. He is hesitant to talk himself up and talk about some of his amazing accomplishments in sport, and he is extremely open-minded about learning from other sports such as cricket. He understands that it's very easy as a coach to try and make larger changes in small amounts of time, but it's important to focus on the marginal gains when measuring success. Tom has a growth mindset and uses education to continually get better and improve. Despite his background as an elite athlete, he remains very humble, and he knows he doesn't have all the answers and can learn from his peers in sport. Tom's ability to question his processes and ask himself if he started the year and finished the year with the same ideas and philosophies, and if not, why not, again shows the traits of a growth mindset, and an aspect that is very important in coaching, the ability to self-reflect. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with one of rugby's great characters and learnt something that you can apply to your own coaching. Please share this podcast with your colleagues, especially those who are in strength conditioning, as Tom has provided some great insight into working with a range of different athletes.